Hello everyone, I hope you are doing good. So in today's lecture I am going to discuss about two things, client server and peer-to-peer networks, right? So these are one of the important and common interview questions which you can encounter whenever you go for an IT or a networking interview, right? What do we mean by client server and a client server? What is a client? What is a server? What is a peer-to-peer network and how does their architecture look like? Okay, so let me discuss. So a computer host or a computer PC can act as both a client or a server, right? At one point of time it can act as a client or it can act as a server, and it can also act as a client and a server at a given point of time. Okay, so what determines how my host or PC is acting? So the software which is installed on the computer, right, determines which role the computer plays. Okay, so server and software, they are the hardware devices, right, and they have the software which is installed on them. Okay, so server and host, they are server and host, they are the hardware devices and they have the software installed which empower them to provide information to other host or server on the network, and the software which is installed on them determines whether the hardware equipment is acting as a client or it is acting as a server. Okay, each server service requires different server software, right? If you are talking about file server, right, it requires a different software service. If you are talking about email server, right, it requires a different server software service, right? So different server service requires different server software. Okay, and clients have software installed, right, that enables host or a PC to request and display information obtained from the server. Okay, so let's suppose if you're talking about a client, right, you are using a laptop or you are using let's suppose mobile, or you are using a tablet to view this video. So you have the required software which is installed on your device so that you can properly access this video and you can properly hear my voice. Okay, so the software part is very important, right? Let's suppose if you are using a file server software, right, so you cannot expect a machine which is using a file server software to run videos, right, or do video editing, correct? So this is very important. You need a correct software to access the correct service, right? So that is the important part. So some of the client software are like, let's suppose if you want to access internet or browse internet, right? So some of the browsing engines are like Chrome, Edge, Safari or Firefox. Okay, email client software like Gmail, you use Gmail or Microsoft Outlook to access your email from the mailbox, right? Your emails are stored on the mailbox, right, and you use a client email client software like a Gmail or Outlook, right, to basically pull up your email from the server and to view it properly, right? You need a proper software, right? That is important. So like you cannot tell me that, let's suppose you are using Adobe Photoshop, correct, which is a video editing or a photo editing tool, right, to access the email, right? It doesn't make sense. You are not using this software to access an email, right? So this software is not made to access your emails, right? So similarly vice versa, Gmail is not made to basically do video editing or Photoshop or photo editing, right? So you need a proper software to access a proper service. Okay, so host can send and receive messages on the network, right? Similarly server, you need an internet connection, right, whether wireless or ethernet based, to send or receive messages on the network. Okay, so in modern times a computer or an hardware equipment can act as a client or a server or a both at a given point of time. At a given point of time. Okay, so let's suppose you are talking about this PC and this PC, right? Your this PC1 or a PC2 can act as a client and it can act as a server, and they can also act as both, right? Client server or server client. Okay, so this kind of architecture is also called as P2P model. or peer-to-peer model. So I'm going to discuss this thing in detail like few moments from now. But this is a simple P2P model or a client or a server, right? Obviously you need an internet which is like wireless to so that they can talk to each other, or you need a cable based connection, right? You enter one point of cable over here and you enter one point of cable over here. Okay, so they should be able to talk to each other themselves, right? So this is a simple P2P model or peer-to-peer model. I am going to discuss this in detail right in this video only. Okay, so let's suppose client. Like first let us understand what is client and what is server. Okay, so client is nothing. They are the computer hosts that have software installed that enables host or a client to request and display information which is obtained from the server. Okay, so they have the proper server software, they have the proper client software installed, like you have the proper Android software if you are using mobile, or iOS software if you are using Apple, or if you have proper Windows, Linux, or Ubuntu, right? So you have proper software installed so that you can properly access and display the information which you are getting from the server. And what is server? They are the host machine that have software installed which enable them to provide information like email, web pages, or to other hosts on the network, right? So you need, server is nothing but a computer which have a high processing capability as compared to a client, right? So and they have the proper software installed on them which enable them to provide the information. Okay, so next thing, example of client software. So some of the example of client software are what? Like Internet Explorer, Mozilla Firefox, and Chrome, right? So let's suppose if you are browsing internet, obviously you need these kind of softwares, right? Now you cannot, or nobody can tell you like you are using Photoshop to browse internet, right? It doesn't make sense. You do not use Photoshop to browse internet, right? Similarly, you don't use these tools to do video editing, right? Obviously nowadays, I mean, you have some cloud based native applications which are installed. That is a different story. But like you cannot say me that you are doing video editing on Internet Explorer, right? It doesn't make sense because Internet Explorer is a search engine. It's not a video editing software. Okay, so similarly the web pages that we visit are stored on web server remotely, somewhere remotely. Okay, and we need proper software on the client side so that we can access these web pages properly in a good fashion. Okay, so that is the important thing you have to keep in mind. And some of the different types of server softwares are, let's suppose if you're talking about email software, right? The email server runs the email server software, right? Like email clients use the mail client software such as Gmail to access the email which is stored on the server, right? You are using the Gmail, it's a mail client software, right? Or you are using Outlook, you are using this front end utility to access the emails which are stored somewhere remotely on the server of Microsoft or Google or whichever platform you are using, right? So next thing is web server software, right? So the web server basically runs the web server software, and you use, clients use, like we people use Chrome, Safari, or search engines to access web pages on the server software. Okay, so we need proper servers, we need proper client server software, and we also need proper server software so that we can properly access the services. Next thing is the file software server. The file server basically stores down the user file or the corporate files in a central location, right? Maybe physically or remotely. It depends upon how you are storing your files, right? Or remotely. Correct? And what is the client software service which you need to access these files which are stored remotely, right? It can be any file. It can be Word file, PDF file, or even your videos, right? Anything, right? Anything which you need to store it so that you can later access it in the future, right? So you use software such as FileZilla, right? So that you can access your files remotely in future at a given point of time. Okay, so this is a basic introduction of what is client and what is server, right? This is very basic introduction. Okay, client and server. So once you have understood this client and server part, next part which is important which comes is the peer-to-peer network. Okay, a peer-to-peer network is a very simple form of network, right? Generally we don't have these kind of network, but we begin the foundation of networking from here. Peer-to-peer network, simple network. A very simple network. Okay, a computer can, as we discussed it before, a computer can act as both a client or server, right, at a given point of time, depending upon the software and depending upon the configuration we are running. Okay, so in a simple Soho network or a small office home office network, right, the same computer can be used to act as both client and server at a given point of time, right? But generally it is not recommended. Why? Because let's suppose you are using your PC as a client, right, and you are also using the same PC as a server, right? So depending upon the configuration, it is going to create lot of delays, right? And obviously if you are using, or if you have configured your PC to run as a client and a server at the same point of time, right, it is also going to have lot of, it's like putting lot of burden on your PC, right? Obviously it is going to overburn your PC, right? So similarly we tend to keep, different PCs or different, hardware for different kind of application, so as to prevent delays also, right? It can also create overheating of your PC, because let's suppose if you are configuring your PC or a host machine to run it as a server, right, you cannot afford it to shut it down. You have to keep it 24/7 open, right? Otherwise whatever you are storing on your server, you won't be able to access it, right? So similarly it is recommended to keep, like different PC or different hardware for different kind of applications. Okay, in simple P2P network, you can use basically wired connection or a wireless connection, right? So this is an example of a simple peer-to-peer network, right? This is PC1 and this is PC2. Okay, so they are acting as client or server, or client server, or client server, or server client, or server client, or server or client, right? So this is a simple peer-to-peer model, and so that they can talk to each other for connectivity purposes, you need an internet, whether it is wireless, right, and or a wired or a cable based internet. Okay, so this is an example of a simple peer-to-peer network or a simple network. Okay, so let us understand the next point, right? What is the next point? Let me change my pen color. Okay, so let us understand the next point. Next point is what? Same computer can act as client or a server. Okay, in larger networks, client and server are kept separate so that large amount of traffic can be handled by server. Okay, so this is one of the important points you have to keep in mind. Let's suppose you need your host machine to act as a server, right? So you need maybe 3 TB or 4 TB of machine, right? The hardware, the hard disk storing space, right? You need maybe 50 or 60 GB of RAM, right? So if you are going to buy this PC with this application, you, even if you get it in the market, right, you cannot afford it to carry everywhere, because it is going to be heavy, right? So generally it depends upon the application you are using, and it is always recommended to keep the server thing separate, the client thing separate. Okay, so this is the thing. So there are various advantages and disadvantages which are associated whenever we talk about peer-to-peer networking. So what is the advantage of peer-to-peer networking? Easy to set up, right? It is very easy. You need two physical hardware equipment, right, and you can configure them to act as client or server or client or both, CS, so client and server. And similarly you can use this, right, and you need a wire connection or an internet connection, right, and they can, it's a simple, very simple thing, right? Easy to set up, less complex. It is not complex, right? Since it is not complex, so it is unsecured also, right? There is no security, right? So there can be some man in the middle and you can connect it over here, right? So it can also lead to MITM or man in the middle attacks, right? So this is another topic which we are going to discuss in detail. But again, you should know like what kind of benefits you are getting, or what kind of losses you are getting if you are using a certain kind of topology, right? Lower cost, because it's very lower cost, so there is no dedicated server, right? You can buy 2 PC from the market, right, and you can build a simple peer-to-peer network, P2P network, right? So the cost of setting up of this network is very small or low, right? It can be used for simple tasks such as transferring file and sharing printer, right? So it is always recommended to use it for a very simple task, but generally it is not used, right? So let's suppose you have to only give a command to a printer to print a file, right? So for print sharing or for file sharing, obviously you can use peer-to-peer network. Okay. So next thing, what are the disadvantage of peer-to-peer networking, right? So it is no centralized administration. Both are connected to each other, right? There is no central administration, right? You cannot centrally manage. You have to manage both the computers, right? They are like, same eyes of a person, right? Same eyes of a person, right? There is no central administration, right? This is not secure, right? Not secure. So two eyes of a same person, two eyes of a same person, right? So this is the peer-to-peer network, right? You have one person, it has two eyes, right? Simple peer-to-peer network, as simple as that. It is not scalable. You cannot scale this network, right? Because you need lot of hardware, no central administration, right? You need physical access, right? You can do it remotely, or you can have or manage over internet, but it is not as scalable as the other topologies which are available in the market, right? And all the devices may act as both client and server, which can slow their performance, right? It can create what? Lot of delays, right? So that is some of the disadvantages of using a peer-to-peer network. Okay, so let us discuss the next thing. What are peer-to-peer application, or what are some of the important points, right? Let's discuss this as well. A peer-to-peer or a P2P application allows device to act as both client and a server, or client or a server, or a server or a client at a given point of time. Okay, at a given point of time. Okay, so this is the first point. So client is equal to server and server is equal to client. Okay, so if I am using a peer-to-peer application, so this is client, this is server, this is server, this is client. Okay, so client is equal to server, server is equal to client, right? Because there is no difference, right? So that this is the meaning of this statement. Next thing, in a peer-to-peer application, each end device provides a user interface and a background service. Okay, so let's suppose if you have configured this PC, as your file server, obviously you are going to require a proper service so that this PC can act as a file server. And let's suppose if you have configured this PC as a client, obviously you are going to need a proper service or a proper application so that you can access files using this server. Okay, and vice versa. So you need proper background service, or you need proper software to access data which is stored in one computer. If you are accessing from computer 1 to 2, so you need proper services, right? So that you can access from 1 to 2 or 2 to 1 and vice versa. Okay, it depends upon the service. Okay, so next thing, multiple roles in a network, right? Let's suppose you are having a server, right? You can configure one server to act in a multiple way. Let's suppose you are using one physical server. This physical server can give you function of emails, that is storing emails. This physical server can give you function of storing web pages, right, or web related data. And this physical same server can also give you advantage of storing your files, right? So you are taking the output of 3 in 1, right? Obviously this server is going to have some like high application, or some a good amount of storage, like maybe 3 or 4 TB of hard disk space, right? HDD, right? Solid state, right? Or maybe 60 or 70 GB of RAM, right? So you can configure this, it is giving you output of 3 in 1, so that you don't have to invest money in 3 different servers, right? So that is the thing. Now you can configure this client machine or a simple host machine, right, as a file access client. That means you are accessing files from this server, right? So let's suppose if you are configuring it as a file access client, right, you can use software such as FileZilla, right, to access files which are stored in this server. Okay, if you are using this machine as a web server, right, or an email client server, right, so you can use a software like Gmail or Outlook to access your emails which are stored in this server. Okay, so this is the second thing. Web browser or file access client, right? Again, web browser. Let's suppose you need Chrome, right? Or Safari or any search engine or Internet Explorer, right? To access the files of the web pages which are stored in this server. Okay. Again, file access client. What? For file access client, you need what? FileZilla, right? There are many software. I am giving example of one, FileZilla, right? So you can access your files using FileZilla from this server. Okay. Simple examples of a peer-to-peer network, right? What do I want to show using this image is that either you can use for a single application or dual application or multiple application, right? The same computer you are using to access web browser, right? Email client and also file access client, right? Obviously you need proper software to have access to proper services, right? You need a different software for web browser like Safari or Chrome. You need a different software to access your email like Gmail or Outlook, and you need a different software to access your files which are stored over here like FileZilla, right? So software application is also very important, and also you can configure to have like the service as you want to access. Okay, so this is the important point you can keep in mind for peer-to-peer networks. Okay, let's see the next point. Computer which is acting as a server can provide multiple services to one or many clients. Okay, it is providing multiple services to one or many clients, right? It depends upon which service you want to have access of here. Okay, so it is providing you multiple services to one or many computers. Okay, single computer can run multiple server software at the same time, such as above server is running many file services such as email services, web services, file services, right? So I assume this server is going to have a little bit of high capacity, right? So that it can handle the amount of traffic from different computers, right? So you can configure to run either only email server or maybe only web server or also file server, right? It depends upon your application. So what is the advantage? Advantage is that you are saving your cost, right? You are running three in one. Okay. But what is the biggest downside? The biggest downside is that let's suppose you have a cyber security attack on your web server. Okay, that is going to compromise all of your other services as well, like file server and email server as well, right? So that is the biggest disadvantage. Although you are saving on money, right? But let's suppose you have a cyber security attack, right? It is going to compromise everything. If one thing is compromised, all the other thing will be get compromised. Okay, so that is the biggest disadvantage of using, right? So it depends upon your application. Like if you can afford to have so much of risk, then go for this. If you cannot afford to have so much of risk, then it is not recommended to run all these services on one software, because this is giving you single point of failure, right? Single point of failure. So if your this server fails, everything fails, right? If this is running, everything is running, right? So this is not recommended. But again, for this is I'm only covering so that you can understand, right? So this is the reason I'm covering this. Okay, now single computer can also run multiple types of client software. Okay, so let's suppose you are using this computer, right? So you are running multiple client server software. You are running what? Safari as well, right? You are running Outlook or Gmail as well, right? Obviously you can run all of these services at once on your laptop, right? And you are also running FileZilla, right? So a single computer can run one or multiple applications at a given point of time, right? So let's suppose you need a video editing or a photo editing software, server software or a client software, right? You can also run that. You need a video streaming software, you can also run that. Okay, so that is the thing. So a single computer can run a single or a multiple types of client software, right? For every service we require a client software, right? For different service we require a client software, right? You cannot use Adobe Photoshop to browse the internet or vice versa. You cannot use Internet Explorer to do like video editing or audio editing. Obviously you can use some cloud-based application, but there is some dedicated application which you have to use, right? The meaning of this example of using like is that you cannot use like a search engine to do video editing. You need a proper software to do that. Okay, for example you need to access email. Obviously you need Gmail, right? Now you cannot tell me you need a Photoshop to access your email, right? This doesn't make sense. Photoshop is used to do video editing or photo editing or some other application, right? So that is the thing. Similarly, if you are using video editing or a photo editing Photoshop, you can also browse internet the same amount of time, or you can also watch a video, right? So you can run multiple services at a same point of time, right? Obviously you should have the physical hardware resources to accommodate the type of services you are using, right? So that is one of the factors you have to keep in mind. So I assume I was able to make you understand the client server, what is the meaning of the word client server, and also peer to peer network. Okay.